Welcome in, Braves Today, bravestoday.com. He is Lindsay Crosby. I am Ben Taylor. It is all brought to you by none other than Plains Coffee. Go to plainscoffee.com. Promo code BRAVES, your 10% off. Lindsay, I got my panic button somewhere around here. I've forgotten where it was. I'm now panicked that I can't find my panic button. Is it time to panic on all facets of the Braves, whether it be offense, whether it be pitching, whether it be overall record? They're not in first anymore. Where do we start? Let's start with pitching. It's time to panic, right? We don't have enough pitching.
It is not time to panic. I don't really care what Jake Mintz of Cespedes Barbecue says on Twitter. The pitching staff is not the reason Atlanta went 1-5 on the road trip.
No.
It's frustrating. It's a little bit lazy analysis. If you haven't watched Atlanta play since the first week or two of the season, and you know this Mr. Strider's out, it's easy to say, yeah, Braves pitching's a problem. Mm-hmm. But outside of Bryce Elder's, implosion on Saturday, every other starter pitched well enough for you to win. It wasn't that. It was the offense. So I'll go ahead and say, no, don't panic about the pitching staff so that you can then ask me about the offense.
Well, I told you, though, about Elder. Here's my take on Elder is, number one, it's his second game out as far as the majors are concerned. Yeah. Not just that, it's on the road in L.A., West Coast, against the Dodgers, who, in case anybody hasn't noticed, they're not that bad of a team this year. So we shall see if that continues to hold water as far as Elder is concerned the rest of the year. I think you said it best. If this is October, late September right now, I don't know that we see Elder on the mound.
Yeah, if this is a playoff game against the Dodgers, Elder's not out there, ideally, right? In an ideal scenario, he's not the guy you send out there. Your rotation is Fried and Sale and Lopez and Morton, and you saw Morton and Fried both pitch well enough for Atlanta to win against that team. Morton gives up 2 runs in 6 innings. Fried gives up 4 runs in 7. It was 2 homers, 2 mistake pitches, both curveballs left up. Mm-hmm. Outside of that, they both pitch well enough to win. If this was the postseason, you're not having to deal with that. And it's just can the offense catch up? So, yeah, it's lazy to assume that they lost because of the pitching staff. But when you're national media, sometimes that's all the time. The only analysis you have time for is lazy analysis.
Well, and that's because a lot of times whenever it comes to wins and losses, they say, well, so it's Fried caught the loss. Instead of saying, you know what? The hitters caught the loss because they looked absolutely, except for Ronald Acuna Jr., nobody looked really great. He had a fairly good series against L.A. as far as total hits were concerned. And so even had a bomb, which we've talked about how his power numbers are down. However, it seemed to be another one of those cases where Olsen just couldn't come around. Riley he wasn't great. He still had some timely hits, but he still wasn't great. But the rest of the guys just seemed kind of not to show up on this road trip.
Yeah. As a whole, on the 6-game road trip, Atlanta, and I pulled the stats this morning. There's a column on Braves Today where I talked about it. On the road trip, Braves batters batted 168 with I can't do math in my head, a 462 OPS. Mm-hmm. Not great. 58 strikeouts, 8 total extra base hits. They stranded 31 runners and barely averaged 2 runs a game on the road trip. So, yeah, it's the offense's problem that Atlanta went 1-5, not the pitching staff. Now, that being said, and I made this point in the column as well, this offense, these players are too good for this to continue this season. Mm-hmm. You may change the ceiling on their season somewhat. I don't know if Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to replicate his MVP season from last year. He finished last year with 84 strikeouts. He's already at 40 this year. He already has more multi-strikeout games in 2024 than he had all of 2023. Even if he goes on a Marcell Ozuna tear, it doesn't feel like he's going to finish with 41 homers and 70-plus stolen bases. Now, he could, but it doesn't feel like that's going to happen. So maybe the ceiling's a little bit lower. But he's too good to struggle like this all year. Matt Olson's too good to bat 197 all year. And Brian Sinker said that. You got to keep running these guys out there. You have to give them an opportunity to get out of it because they're going to. It's what you worked with Marcell Ozuna last year. Mm-hmm. They ran him out there almost every day, despite him being the offensive equivalent of hot garbage.
Oh, gosh. That was our biggest complaint, man.
Yeah, .081. And he turned around and finished with, batting. From that point on, he batted .300 the rest of the year. He had 40 homers and 100 RBIs. And so this offense is going to figure it out. The question's going to be, how long does it take? And what kind of hole does Atlanta dig for themselves until it happens? Because what's wild here is Atlanta is, I want to say they're 2.5 games back, and they haven't been 2.5 games back since late in the 2022 season. But remember, they still won the division in 2022. They came back and they tied the Mets on the final day, had the tiebreaker, won the division there, and then went almost wire to wire last year. So all of this, you're still only 2.5 games behind, and while Philly is 9-1, they just lost Trey Turner for 6 to 8 weeks.
Well, and listen, when people look at that and they're already chirping about how far we are behind in the standings, and I sit there and I go, yeah, but that's because you went 1-5. I mean, this is the same team that can go 5-1 their next 6 games just because of the potential power that they have. And not to paint a rosy color, but they were due to have some bumps in the road throughout the season, as we talked about, and they just happened to happen all at one time. Now, if this continues and it's 1-5 out of the next 5, then there's probably some cause for some concern, and maybe some guys get moved around and some lineups get shifted, that kind of thing.
And remember, you had bad stretches last year too. Mm-hmm. You had a 6-game homestand against the White Sox, and who was the other team? It was the White Sox and the Diamondbacks, where you won the first game and the last game, and you were outscored by 17 runs in the middle. You got swept in Toronto. You barely won 1 game out of 3 against Oakland. Yes. You've had bad stretches.
Oakland and Colorado last year. Goodness gracious.
Matter of fact, the Dodgers, the same Dodgers team that just speed bagged Atlanta this weekend, they had a 6-game stretch in mid-April where they went 1-5, struck out 52 times, and lost series to the Padres, the Nationals, and the Mets. This kind of stuff happens when you play 162 games. And they're going to work out of it because they've always worked out of it, and they're too good to not work out of it. The frustrating thing is we don't know how long it'll take.
Exactly. It's all brought to you by Plains Coffee or plainscoffee.com. Promo code BRAVES. Get your 10% off. They've got everything from flavored coffee. They have the teas, and they do not roast those beans until you place your order, and then they will ship it right to your door. Go to plainscoffee.com. Promo code BRAVES. Get your 10% off. So overall, Lindsay, it's to put a bow on this, is people are panicked about the pitching. People are panicked about the hitting. What's the overall perception of now the Braves return home, get an opportunity to face kind of a down Boston team, and maybe bump out of this before taking over the Mets or taking on the Mets?
I'd argue this Boston team is better than you're giving them credit for. 19-16, they're in 3rd place in the American League East, but that's because Baltimore has one of the best records in baseball.
Yep.
And Boston's pitching staff as a whole has the lowest ERA in baseball, and by a third of a run. It's not like they're barely ahead. So this has been a good Boston team. They've had some significant struggles defensively early in the year. They had some notable losses where they just looked pretty bad. But this is overall a pretty decent club, and Vaughn Grissom's back now. So they get that offensive help. They get to get rid of the black hole at second base and put Vaughn Grissom in there. So I'd argue they're a little better than we're maybe giving them credit for. And things don't get super easy for Atlanta because you get them for 2 games, and then you get the Mets in New York, who always play Atlanta tough.
Yep.
And then you've got the Cubs, the Padres, who just went out and traded for Luis Ariz.
Yeah.
Then you go to Chicago and play the Cubs again. Again, so dumb how you do that. So you've got some tough series coming up, but 2 home games against Boston. This team feels like they play better at home. A lot of late game magic, a lot of 8th and 9th inning runs. They're still great at scoring runs in the 8th inning. So you feel like even if you're down after the initial bit of the game, you've got some time to turn around and win these 2 games before you go on the road trip. Again, Mets for the weekend, and you're back home. I think this team's going to be fine. Pitching staff-wise, you got Ronaldo Lopez, you got Chris Sale, You feel happy with both of them and what they've done so far this year starting. Then you get another day off before you roll the next 3 out there. You have some time. Obviously, you have some space and some time to build in some rest for your starters. You don't overuse these guys. Build in some rest for your bullpen, who had to cover some, had to cover some innings, had some pieces move around, losing Pierce Johnson. I think you're in an okay place. You're not in a bad place. You're not in a great place right now, but you're in an okay place. And again, Philly is in the position of having lost probably their most dynamic player, and having to replace him with subpar options. And they've got Toronto. They do get to face Miami for 3 games, which is a bummer, but then they've got the Mets, they've got the Nationals, they've got the Rangers. They've got some tough games coming up too. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it can work itself out. I know that with this Boston series, it's just a 2-game series. It's going to take place. I'm going to call a split, even though I'd love to call a sweep. But I think right now they're trying to figure something out at the plate. They're just not real sure what it is. And I told you, I said I'd like to see the approach change a little bit. They are still lifting the ball. Ball's still not carrying. I did appreciate a lot of the comments where they kind of agreed with us. I really thought that would not take place when you and I threw that out there. But there were a lot that were like, you know what, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And so I do think that that has been an issue. And I mean, we saw it in LA too. I mean, Olsen hit a couple that went deep. Also, Ozuna went oppo at one time that I thought it was going to, even Godin thought it was going to go out of the park, and ends up coming up short of the warning track. And I think that approach at the plate has got to change. And I think that has to do so before the All-Star break, where it's like, okay, when we start getting in these warmer days and the ball starts flying a little bit better, fine. But as long as we're playing in 75 and 80-degree weather, maybe we start hitting the ball on the line a little bit more and try to get some, maybe just some extra base hits here and there.
Well, I think the weather, the 75 or 80 is going to be the key here, because so many of your games, Seattle, it was obviously colder than that at night and things like that. I think being at home and then getting, New York is warmer this time of year, and then getting Chicago and Padres at home, you're going to have some warm weather. So if it's just a weather thing, I think you'll see it start to turn around a little bit in the next week and a half or so. If it's not a weather thing, that's where we got to go start buying some of these game-used baseballs and cutting them open to figure out what's going on. But unless somebody's already doing that. If you're already doing that, my DMs are open. Let me know. I want to get in on this. I'll help fund some of these baseballs.
Isn't that what that guy did in 2019? He was like an independent guy that did it, wasn't he?
It was she was a physicist, and she partnered with somebody, and they bought game used baseballs and cut them open, and she used all of her physicist knowledge to check them and measure them and weigh them and get info on the manufacturer and how they were different and everything. Yeah, like that's how we figured this out the last time they messed with the balls. So
did MLB lock her up?
No, but I think they had to start buying balls under like fake names and stuff.
They did. I do remember that. Yeah. They did start buying balls under fake names
because they didn't want to like get caught by MLB for doing this. And MLB wasn't happy about it. MLB would not comment on it, would not respond to their request for comment. It was a whole thing. And I'm not saying the balls are altered now. I'm saying it would make a lot of sense if that was the explanation. And I think we'll get an answer to the weather question.
Yeah.
Now that we're in the beginning to middle part of May. The South is due for those 2 or 3 couple days where it's a little chilly. Mm-hmm. That always happens every May. But outside of that, it's not the heat of summer, but this is the month where it gets significantly warmer. And so if it's the weather, you'll get some answers to that pretty quickly, not just for Atlanta, but around the league, because a lot of baseball is in warmer weather now.
Predictions on the Boston series?
Oh, right. I'm gonna say a 2-game sweep because Ronaldo Lopez has been too good, and I just feel like the competitor that Chris Sale is, he's not gonna lose to Boston. He's not. I don't know what he's gonna do. I don't know. He's probably gonna do whatever it takes. He's not going to lose to Boston. That's just, that dude's too much of a competitor to concede a game to Boston.
Who does he hit? That's my question. Is anytime you face
who gets drilled? Who gets drilled?
Honestly, I look back at it and it seems like every time a pitcher faces his former team and his former, let's just call it mates, for some reason he ends up hitting somebody that just completely throws the crowd into a wild craze because they're like, oh, there's bad blood, when clearly it's just a ball that got away from him. But it just so happens that it's against his former team, and it's literally like the first year after he leaves his former team.
I'm going to go on a limb and say it's going to be Jarren Duran, the outfielder, because Duran's a lefty. Sale obviously being a lefty, he might try to pitch him in with a fastball or something, and or throw a sinker and it backs up a little bit. I'm gonna say Jarren Duran's the one that gets hit. Although one of these righties could take a sinker on the foot too. We'll see what happens.
It's going to happen.
A slider on the foot. Sorry.
And Boston writers are going to have a field day with it.
Oh, yeah.
About how he hates Boston and how he's glad he's not back here and all this kind of stuff. So he says sweep. I say 1-1. I think for some reason I said 1-2 last time. They're only playing 2 games. It is 1-1. I think they split.
You said split.
Yeah, I said split. So 1-1, and we shall see. I'm just hoping the bats come alive. That's all I want. If I can get some bats coming alive and some people hitting, I'll be a whole lot happier person because as I said, I'm not panicking on the pitch. We're talking about a team, Lindsay, that at one point in time, just a couple of weeks ago, was averaging 6 per game. And if you get that 6 per game out of this past weekend on the road at Seattle and LA, you win more ball games than going 1-5. So if we can get back to that level, I think they'll be just fine. He's Lindsay Crosby. I'm Ben Taylor. It's all brought to you by Plains Coffee. Go to plainscoffee.com, promo code Braves. Get your 10% off. Lindsay has got tons of written work that is up on bravestoday.com right now. Please go and check all of that stuff out as well. Lindsay, as always, thank you, sir.
Thanks, buddy.